I just lost an hour of time. And usually it becomes much more difficult to cover up when you're in something like a professional program to get a doctor of pharmacy. So that's been an experience. Also, before pharmacy school, I supported myself through undergrad by stripping for 10 years. So during and after undergrad and during pharmacy prerequisites, I stripped for a living. And so that is a form of sex work in America that is legal, but other forms of sex work, like full service sex work, are illegal in most of America. And so even as a legal sex worker, I experienced and observed a lot of injustice and prejudice towards us, and much more so towards my full service sex work fellows. So when I look at politics and gaming, of course, I look at things like sexism, queerphobia, transphobia, racism, like racially coded language and characters. But I also look at things like, well, how does it treat sex work? Is it like a joke? Are we a punchline to them? So those are things I look at when it comes to politics in gaming. And as a child, I've played like tabletop games from a young age, and I still do a lot of that stuff with my family through, Zoom for now. But I'm also in 3 current D&D games, which we are playing remotely through using Discord and Roll20. And I also did do some PC gaming back when I had more time, which has not been the last 5-6 years of my life. And as a pharmacist, I am currently in Minneapolis, where I work and live. This is where George Floyd was murdered. His murder was the impetus of the video that led to this discussion video. And my pharmacy was one of 2 in my company that got destroyed during the protests. For context, police didn't feel like 3 days after my sister's store being, set on fire, that my store, which was the only supermarket in a predominantly Black and low-income neighborhood, was worth guarding. But they were able to spare 75 plus officers to guard the murderer's house. So if that gives you an idea of, say, systemic racism in Minneapolis and how it's symbolized by our police force here, that's a tiny, tiny snippet of how my patients were devalued by our local police department. So I have fifis about that too.
Thank you. Travis, last but not least.
Hello, everyone. I'm Travis. I am a Gamilaroi and Darug man, which is First Nations New South Wales in Australia. I am a conceptual artist, writer, producer, and podcaster who kind of works, a lot of my work takes Gamilaroi lore and mixes it with modern fantasy tropes. I was the First Nations producer for the Sydney Opera House, working on sort of First Nations programs and putting on performance work in the Opera House for a number of years. And I was a performer with Bangara Dance Theatre before that. So I've kind of had a fairly intense background in the Australian First Nations arts industry, and have a lot of experience coming up against systemic racism systems within the arts community. My connection to gaming is that I have been a video gamer and tabletop gamer for most of my life, and have that's been my sort of over there space, in that I don't necessarily I turn off my race brain quite often when I game, because it's my if I'm thinking politics and thinking race all the time, I am exhausted all the time. And so often within gaming, that's when I switch off that side of me and let some things slide that I wouldn't normally in my day-to-day life.
So I want to start fairly broad with the conversation and narrow down onto a few things as we go. So at the end of the episode, we said that we thought that gaming should be for everyone. As people who are kind of outside that white male default that tabletop gaming still has, what have your experiences of the hobby and the community been?
Who wants to start with that? Thank you.
Okay, okay, I'll start with that then. So, I mean, my introduction to gaming was in, like, as I said, in the mid-80s with D&D. And I think that for all the Gygax and that cohort of people brought gaming to, like, the wider community and helped to make it, like, this global phenomenon. I mean, it was, you know, and always has been incredibly white and incredibly male. And that's always just been the standard. And I remember being so excited and so overjoyed when they came out with, like, the second ed setting by Jeff Grubb, which was Al-Qadim, which was suddenly, it was finally, there was, like, you know, it's like, this was about Persia, this is about Arabia, this is about a different place. And although this is now something that probably wouldn't ever be created in the way it was, I found it incredibly helpful that there was something that was connected to part of my past and part of my heritage. So, I mean, I'm half Pakistani, but that half Pakistani part was, they were immigrants from Persia in the 11th century AD. And because of the way in which that community and that culture grew up, they were very kind of like genetically insular because of, you know, the way in which, I mean, as Shia Muslims, it's like very much married within that same cultural identity. And so for me, it was like, this is a part of a past history that I can finally touch with. At the same time, it's a white guy doing it. It's a white guy talking to other white people about how white people see these wonderful, mysterious, othered, orientalized, if we want to draw on kind of like political theory and Edward Said's Orientalism work, it's like, it's the way in which we are magically othered into mysterious, wondrous, animalistic, almost, types of beings. So it was great, but it was also a problem.
I will jump in about, I think my experience, so Sarah was talking about ADHD. I have OCD and PTSD. So there's also the neurodivergence with OCD. So again, it was something that kind of hit me later. But trauma, complex trauma is my life. So one of probably my first experiences with gaming was the fact that complex trauma and incidences of trauma are played as unexceptional standard events. Let's just throw in a trauma, let's just throw in a mental health condition. And that even, it kind of taught me for a long time that it wasn't appropriate for me to be affected by that negatively, that it's part of gaming. So that's what you just sort of accept. There's a lot of internalized ableism around trauma, mental health, disability in gaming. I had experiences. I remember the first time that I went to a big video game convention. It was at it's Queensland competition at the QE2 Stadium, and I went in, and I wasn't a gamer myself. I was coming to support my then boyfriend, who was in the top 3 of Quake 3. It was awesome. And I walked in, and it was me and my best friend, and we were the only 2 women in the entire stadium, and the entire place stopped and stared at us. So this was 2003 or something. So there's been those sort of experiences where I've been personally very accepted amongst my friends for gaming and things like that, except for the trauma coming up. But then going into other environments, it's quite shocking to see that. But yeah, they're my sort of, and yeah, queer jokes all the time. A lot of experiences where there's like, oh, are you role playing? Oh, is that a sexual joke? You 2 men. And it's like, if it is, it is. If it isn't, that isn't the butt of a joke. That shouldn't just be fine. So those sort of things come up quite a lot. Oh, fake girl gamer stuff. Sarah just raised that. Yeah, fake girl gamer. That's regularly a thing, where you have to list your credentials and you have to be able to justify why and how and when you first discovered something. And even friends of mine, when I would learn about something that I hadn't through my life learnt about, and I'd learn about it and get excited about it and then like want to research it and get into it, and did my, now I understand, OCD loops where I'd like really go hard with the research and I'd like learn it all, and then they'd be like, but you just heard about it, so you aren't allowed to love that the way I do. And it was kind of like me loving it was taking something from them in some way, which I think is a bit of a common theme with that sort of culture. That, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that with disability, what I've noticed in games is like, and this may be a large part of why I don't like games like Arkham Horror, aside from it being like 9,000 fucking hours to get through a game, which I'm not into. Like, a lot of the time it's, oh, your character has this trauma, and so it gives them -2 points on this skill, the end. Like, well, no, but that's not really what it's like. I mean, yeah, for some of us, we can, are being neuroatypical or having a disability, like those things can just be challenging for one aspect of our life, but that can still be debilitating. Like that, I definitely know that if I'd been diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 12, my life would be very different, and I would have had a lot less hardship, a lot less pain, not gone through like a ton of like suicidal ideation during my depression. You know, it's really frustrating when those things are kind of taken as flavor, like a little seasoning for the game, because heaven forbid white people use any seasoning. So they'll just use my, disability as a fun little thing. But I did like Scalzi, who is a straight white man that I really, really enjoy. He, made a blog a long time ago saying living life as a straight white male is like playing life on the lowest difficulty setting. Like, yes, you can still have problems come up, but you're going to have a lot less on average. And I've also heard it described as, if you're a white person and you go through hardship, you can go through hardship, but that hardship is despite being white, not because of being white. And so I think in games, a lot of the time, they don't do a good job of addressing that. And so there is definitely a lot of default player gatekeeping going on. And I think that's a large reason why I like games like Rummikub or Azul or Quicks, like games that really don't involve like people or characters. It's really just like, hey, let's all sit around and we have these skills and whatever. So aside from maybe color blindness, there's really not as much there in terms of cultural context that we're dealing with.
One of the big things for me is like my favorite games are all like mechanics based, and the mechanic being like conquest. And so like I used to play a lot of Warhammer, and it's like, well, what is that? You talked about it in the video with Small Worlds, and like being a First Nations person who is, who would be a lost tribe in Small Worlds. Like, how am I supposed to feel as I'm then like, well, basically role playing a colonizer? So it's like interesting kind of being in that headspace suddenly. And like I said, like often when I play games, I turn off that lens because otherwise there's no enjoyment for me at all. So like in terms of the sort of Australian gaming community and how like I've found like you need to create your own community and subsect within that, who is your community. The whole community is not your gaming community, where you are feeling like you're in a safe space. Because I've come up with, obviously I am a white passing person in terms of my First Nations heritage. But when people find out that, oh, I'm not white as they would think I am. Out come the salty slurs when you beat them in a match of Magic the Gathering or something like that, and it's like I have the sudden urge to flip a table, which is like that added extra bit of just things going on for someone who would, that's not what you go to those spaces for. You go to those spaces to have a good and enjoyable time. I wanted to like just sort of touch on like the only game that I've come across that sort of use First Nations people was like an iPhone game where like Aboriginal people in particular, where it got shut down really quickly, but it was huge news in Australia when it came out. It was like you got to hunt Aboriginal people in the Australian bush. And it was like obviously very, very problematic and really shit. And like I was talking to my friend who manages the Good Game store, and I was like, why are there no Australian like based games in the shop? And he's like, well, no one's made any. And why are there no games like from a First Nations perspective? It's like, well, no one's made any. And it's like, there's a couple. You just have no one's done their research around this, and there's some really great games with cool mechanics that you guys have just never heard of.
Could you please share some?
So much,
yeah.
In the link below. Say it, Sam. In the link below.
Yes, any excellent games that Travis recommends for us, we will definitely put in the down there part for you all to go and explore.
I think it's a really important part to remember as well that it's racism within gaming. It's not just about racism within gaming. It's not just about the kind of like the person-to-person dialogue, the kind of like the slurs that come out. And that's the same for kind of like, transphobia or homophobia and ableism as well. It's like, it's not just the personal interactions. It's the structure of the game that we're provided with, the various kind of the content and context of it. But it's also around kind of like the way in which we get the opportunities for publishing, the way in which we're given kind of like connection, the social connections that you have as a group of white guys all hanging around together, all speaking the same kind of language with each other, that gets you into the publishing, into the writing, into the producing, into the running game shops and kind of like setting up companies that are just a little bit more successful because you don't have all this structural stuff behind it, making just a little bit more difficult each time. Even if that difficulty is only a 1% difficulty, it adds up over time and it becomes more significant. So I had another point, but that's a good point, I think. My mind just disappears and I forget stuff all the time. It's great. There was another, no, I lost it. Sorry.
I think that's like, it's a similar thing, and it's like a big theme around things that are happening at the moment, but like there is no person of color representative like in any of the executive teams across the arts in Australia, and like so that like those issues just filter down. I know I don't have a lens to look at the sort of gaming kind of companies in Australia and how they work, but I know that like in America, Wizards of the Coast has, there's been a lot of kind of furor at the moment and conversations around how Wizards deals with like people of color and queer people and all of those, and like the lackluster way it's been done in the past, and they're kind of doing this whole black cladding thing at the moment.
Black cladding, what a phrase.
Oh yeah, do you need me to explain black cladding?
I've not heard that before. I have an idea of what it might mean, but yeah, please do explain for those people who might not have heard it.
Yeah, of course. So like when a company, it's a particularly like a First Nations term, it's come around recently, but when a company uses basically puts a black skin on their product to sell it to First Nations people or Black people, or not necessarily financial gain, but for, you know, cultural clout, like Wizards have done with certain characters in Dungeons and Dragons recently and Magic the Gathering.
You're muted, Rowena.
Yeah, I think Sarah has frozen, so hopefully she will come back. But let me know when I'm unfrozen. Yes, okay, I will. I was thinking with the black cladding. So what you're talking about is when you're stripping, like it's used as well in the green movement. People will green. I can't remember the term anymore for environmentalist decisions at corporate. Yeah, they just strip away all of what they take their carbon copy default and they put a skin on it. They don't actually think about how it may change, which it will, to change those fundamental aspects of how you experience the world. And that's done just for brownie points that I don't even know who they do it for, frankly, because
you see it a lot with the rainbow flag as well, and how that's used by companies, you know, as a like money making, like a marketing tool. And the diversity banner of like, there's a whole bunch of companies in Australia that have a reconciliation action plan, or we value diversity and inclusion as a like mission statement, and there's no kind of follow through on that. And like, just I think with gaming, you don't see that stuff so much, but we're starting to, because of, I think, the lens of what the Black Lives Matter movement in America has sort of turned, I guess like turned the spotlight on kind of this for everyone.
Yep.
It's performative. It's a performance.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not something they believe, it's not something they feel, it's not something they want to internalize and make significant changes. They just perform it. And you know what? The amount of banks who put like fucking pride flags on their shit. It's like, I'm sorry, banks, just fuck off. Really? I mean, it's like, I could go into academic terms of why it's so bloody problematic, but you're not worth it. Just like, don't do it. If you want to make significant change, then you know what? Get rid of the homophobes, get rid of the transphobes, get rid of the racists, and hire a shitload of people who are different if you want to change the actual culture, and then change the culture. Don't just hire them, change the actual culture. Put them in charge.
Yeah,
don't hire them as a diversity hire.
That's been a discussion point in Minneapolis. So during the protests and riots and so forth, there were a lot of businesses who were coming out with, you know, BLM statements, some of which rang hollow, and some employees would come forward about businesses that very much were not really backing up that statement with their company policies and actions. So it's been interesting because there's been this big upheaval anyway because of COVID in America, because we are responding to it terribly. So there's a lot of businesses that are having to permanently close because they just can't handle the shutdown. And so a lot of employees have also been coming forward like, no, like screw this, like Black Lives Matter, like messaging that this company is putting out, because let me tell you what the owner said to, you know, me as a Black employee like last year. But another thing that was interesting was the day my pharmacy was set on fire, I was out and about in our sister city of St. Paul doing street medic stuff, and everything was on fire, except many businesses that had like Black owned business on there. Some people were guarding their own businesses. It was a trip, but it did make me think about how many of these businesses that have these signs up saying like, we support Black lives, like, do you? Or are you saying that because you don't want your window broken into? And by the way, I keep looking into all these stores that have like broken windows and people going into them, and it's not Black people. So I don't know, you guys. But it is this idea of like how much of this is just you trying to get good messaging across. So it's been very interesting in Minneapolis, St. Paul, seeing all these businesses that many of us are familiar with being kind of outed as not as supportive as they have seemed in the past. And other businesses being like, yep, we got broken into, and guess what? We'll be fucking fine because property is replaceable, human life isn't.
Yep. I think actually you mentioned, Sarah, I was just thinking about like getting back to, because this is our world, right? This is our world that we are moving through all the time. And so obviously, as Sarah was saying, this, and Travis as well, in terms of trying to like shut off some of that brain when you go into a gaming space. But when it is inherent in the design of the game, it's going to be jumping at you. Like you're trying to ignore it. So Sarah said her approach was to sort of only focus on mechanics, things that don't deal with that at all. And Travis, you were saying it was mechanics as well. Is that how you're managing to switch off? Because like for example, like I actually really love all of the Cthulhu mythos. Like my favorite are theme-based games. And like, yes, you pick up a card and suddenly someone will have my mental illness, or someone will have my chronic pain, or someone will, like, these things will just be handed out like candy with no, and I have to just switch it entirely off to cope, you know? And it shouldn't be like that, but it's in the game. So are you making choices to just not play certain games entirely, or how do you?
Definitely. Definitely. I mean, I do a lot of computer gaming because it's easy to, especially during the pandemic when you live pretty much on your own and haven't had human contact for like 5 months. I mean, and my default games are Dragon Age and Mass Effect. And in Dragon Age, literally, it's like, I'm sorry, but I play the elves, you know, because my experience is as somebody, not just because of my race, as a brown person, but also as a trans person who experiences constant ongoing systemic discrimination and marginalization. I mean, at the moment in the UK, they're trying to decide whether, you know, trans women are allowed to piss in public, you know, not in public on the street. Please don't do that. But, you know, I mean, it's like access to toilets, something that has never been legally regulated and has never been a problem. But this, like, all of this, like, shit going on around you. Dragon Age, Mass Effect, there are a few other games that actually take on and responsibly engage with these kind of issues and experiences and give you the opportunity to play from those perspectives. So Dragon Age, you can play a Dalish elf, you know, and it's it's written in, but also a very profound part, because you can be the hero of Ferelden and totally get freedom for your homeland as a part of the way in which you can win the game. You know, it's like, and that makes a real difference when you do have that, and it's not just performative, because that was deliberately written into the game as a way in which to kind of like to at least a little bit come to terms with those kind of experiences and ideas. And the same with like sexuality as well. I mean, relationships are pretty much, you can date who you want. And it's like in Dragon Age 2, there's like, yeah, I mean, there's totally like, you can totally go poly on that as well.
Yeah.
And it's great. Those kind of like, those opportunities and possibilities that might for many people be just like a cool little bit of coloring that you know, you can have fun, you can play a different gender or whatever. But for those of us where it's more profound, it's like, no, please, thank you for actually having that. And part of the Mass Effect Andromeda, I don't know if any of you remember when that came out. It's like, yeah, there were the dodgy faces, and you know, the characters weren't quite developed in as good a way as the previous Mass Effect games. But there was a whole transphobia thing going on because they dared to have a minor character who was a trans woman, and everywhere people were going on about it. And I'm sitting here as a trans woman going, what? It's not even like that was one of the choices of a character you could play. Dragon Age did it a lot better. They had a trans guy in it, and they actually were considered to be more respectful in the way that they allowed the interaction. And honestly, at that point in time, I would have joined the queue just because of that. Sorry, I'm literally playing Dragon Age Inquisition at the moment, and it's all good. But most of the time, we're either weird freaks of nature, or they're just like we're hypersexualized others. So I mean, to have a positive experience in the game is like, thank you, even if it's done by cis people. It's a good start.
I think that's one of the things is like games and game designers need to be bringing like a very diverse mix of people into the room when they're being made, and not like bringing it in at the end as like, oh, we better have something that speaks to these people. Like I'm just playing through Mass Effect Andromeda at the moment, and there's this moment within that piece that you find out the Ket, and spoilers, sorry if anyone hasn't played it, but you find out that the Ket are like basically homogenizing other races into their own structural system. I was like, what? Okay, all right. So suddenly I like, because I'm playing this white guy who's fighting against this like kind of dark expansive race that is just sucking other races into its core part, and I'm like, no, this is what you guys do. Yeah. And like I was just like coming up, and as you were saying that, like about how I enjoy games by switching off, and it's like these things come up and I suddenly am broken out of that switching off, because like one of the things that white Australians do is like want Aboriginal people to be more like them and assimilate us into that culture. So if you only speak your Aboriginal language, you need to learn how to speak English. And like a lot of Aboriginal languages have disappeared because of white Australia killing them basically over 2 centuries. Anyway, not sorry, but like I got all passionate there.
How dare you be passionate? That's not what this is about. I would definitely say, for me, it's not really so much about like switching off, because when I play D&D, which 2 of my games are every 3 weeks, so I'm playing D&D, well, every 2 to 3 weeks. I'm playing D&D at least a couple times, 2 to 4 times a month. And D&D, we often, talk about whatever political stuff is going on, and we'll work a lot of that stuff in. And so in D&D, we're doing a lot of this, like, there's a lot of queerness in our games. I'm in a ladies group where the DM is a guy. He's the same DM for 2 of my games. So I'm like the most experienced player, which is weird. And then the other game, my partner is in it, and it's his first time playing D&D. So take that, heteronormative stereotypes. But we also talk a lot about like the politics of like, well, okay, this leader of Neverwinter is telling us this, but like, do we trust this dude? Because he is still technically like an aristocrat. So how much do we trust these people, So we do bring that sort of stuff in, but it's fun, it's light, and we all kind of know what page the other's on. I think the reason I really like playing the other types of games like Azul and like Rummikub and all that, I grew up playing that with my family, and I still do play it when, back when planes were a thing and we can visit people. We'd play it because we can sit there and talk. Like, we can still talk to each other about whatever we want, and we would talk about the election because we're Jews, and Jews yell at each other about the election, and the only way to get disowned in my family is probably to vote Republican. So like, we would talk about the election and racism and so forth, and we talk about whatever was going on. And it's the same with my friends when we're playing these games, especially like Quicks. We're really just having a conversation, and the game is more like the background glue. Like, it's keeping track of time, we're having fun, we're doing an activity together, but really the main thing is that we're hanging out together. So most of the games I play are social, and then I have like a lot of games I play on my phone, because if I have to listen to something for a long period of time, having my eyeballs occupied helps me absorb things auditory better. That wasn't a really good sentence, and my English degree is ashamed right now.
I was just going to say with that, like I get really frustrated. I really like social games, and I don't know whether I'm just constantly putting myself through exposure by choosing the sort of games that I like, because I really like social deception, and I really like surprise enemies suddenly appearing, like Betrayal at House on the Hill. Awesome. I really like co-op games, and I like where every mechanic has a thematic reason. That's hugely important to me. Pandemic is an excellent example of that sort of game, but I played it too much, and yeah, I've moved that to the side. And honestly, right now it's a bit on the nose. And also kind of terrifying, because we always would lose. So, I mean, but yeah, I think coming out, like when I was thinking and reading about this, there's actually a great person, Faye Onyx, who's written some awesome works on Writing Alchemy is their website, and they've done a lot of work pulling apart disabled tropes and actually thinking about, specifically from an RPG perspective, but I think that's actually a lot of what my interest in board games are as well. Like, I want to see a consistent character. I generally want to see that that you're playing a character and the strengths and weaknesses that you have for that character make sense, and then the way the mechanics work makes sense for that sort of, like, this is how I get immersed and get involved. And there's so many of the things that I like that are constantly just, yeah, I mean, really triggering, but if you live with complex PTSD, like, the world is a triggering place. So it's sort of background noise, but I find it really interesting that I guess I can still find a place in that, because I can just focus on like the ableist and queerness, if you know what I mean. And I'm not as saturated in the daily everything. There's parts that I can escape already. And I think that sounds like that's the difference in like my experience, because this is all hitting you guys all the time, everywhere.
Well, I think it's a matter of control too. I mean, one of the things that was surprising to me about stripping, you know, I got sexually harassed a lot out and about, and it really bothered me. And then when I started stripping, like, I was still getting technically like sexually harassed, I guess, but it was in an environment where I was expressly there to speak sexually, to have people talk about my body, to make money off of my body. And you know, when you work at a good club where they take care of you and protect you, like, it's by my rules, not by what the customer wants to do. It's no, don't touch me. I'm not comfortable with that. Oh, you went to this other club and they let you, that's great. Go there. You're not there right now. So, you know, like, it made me realize a lot of my trauma. And I do have trauma from work. I have been like low-key sexually assaulted at work regularly, but the difference is, for most of those incidents, I don't have trauma tied to it, because there was immediate repercussion of, all right, cool. Well, you chose to do that. And now I'm going to take the money you owe me and a little extra as an asshole tip. And then the bouncer is going to open the door with your face. Goodbye. And the only traumatic incidents that I have, one included a cop, by the way, so that was cool, were when I didn't have where there wasn't immediate consequence for the perpetrator, where there was no consequence for the perpetrator in the case of the cop. who like direct quotes of like, well, what are you going to do about it? Right. And that overall was a really bad time, but it really helped me realize how much, for me, how much trauma is tied to whether or not there's control in the situation. And so with gaming, like pandemic, I know it seems terrible or whatever, but as a pharmacist who literally, as soon as Trump opens his mouth, you guys, as soon as he opens his fucking mouth, I have to field people being like, so I'm not saying I'm going to drink bleach, but, and then go into, you know, asking me what things they could potentially ingest or inhale to get rid of the Rona. So like for me, pandemic is like, yay, we have control and we can maybe fix this thing. And in pandemic, there's no mechanism for people refusing to wear masks or get vaccines. So it's a really nice fantasy escape for healthcare providers, probably.
Sam, feed us a question.
Okay. I mean, we've actually covered off a lot of the things I was planning to ask questions about. So I'm going to have to go back to my list and just bear with me a second. This has been great. Thank you, everyone. We are at 50 minutes now. I think we were planning to go for about an hour, but honestly, I am happy to keep this going as long as you feel you have things to talk about.
Coffee's in, so I'm good.
Could we talk like D&D and like role playing for a second? Because whilst I'm totally into gaming for the mechanics, like when I play D&D, it's never about the mechanics. It's about the opportunity to like role play someone that I am very not, look at a character from, or another like human experience from an empathy point of view, I think. And like what I guess like the conversation I wanted to have is like, what is acceptable for someone to role play in a D&D group, or like the rules that a group needs to come up with for doing that. Yeah, I just kind of throwing that subject. We can shut it down if people want to.
No, I just didn't want to jump in, but I can. It's actually something that it's particularly relevant to the blog that I was talking about. Faye Onyx's blog has writing diverse characters, and I mean it's aimed for game designers, but it's also for RPGs. And there is a list of questions that Z suggests that we ask when we're looking at and you can apply it to a party. You know, you can apply it to a party and go, okay, so here's my, like, I think as well, it depends whether you're creating a character for a specific group, or whether you're creating a character that you will do in operation. There's an element of how much time can you spend and are you willing to spend to properly consider your character? Because that's a lot of the elements. Like I would feel uncomfortable, and I think it wouldn't be appropriate for me to play any other race other than like a white race, because I have no understanding. Like I would need to, in order to do that respectfully, I would need to go off and like really research and think about this and talk to people and have like that would, I'm just not in a place to do that. But I would be comfortable looking at other axes where I've got some experiences that I can sort of touch on. I think there was I was in a D&D group last year, and one of the other characters was wanting to role play having PTSD at a table with me, who has PTSD and is disabled from it. And so that was an interesting conversation, because you had to think about, well, how are they going to do this? What do they think role-playing PTSD looks like? because I mean, my thesis is literally exploring complex PTSD as represented by Trish Walker in Marvel's Jessica Jones. And that's an example of what I am calling it broken in ways that look like success. I mean, people can have PTSD, and a lot of what we see represented are the one way that war vets experience PTSD, which is not one way at all. So I guess I think the way I think of it is, if I, as someone with PTSD, looks at that and goes, there's a lot of complexity here. What are you thinking about when you want to do this? And why are you wanting to do this? And how do you plan to do this? Like, what are the ways you're going to role play this? I think that I must then, as a player, apply that to everything that is other to me. That's how I think it needs to, like, I don't necessarily mean no all the time. Some things are no, but other things, it's got to be that deep. Like, why are you doing this? Are you doing this because it's cool to explore difference, or are you doing this because you really respect and want to explore a new empathetic experience?
Absolutely. And I think, like, I mean, it is cool to explore difference and to learn, like, from doing in that or being in that way. But then, like, I think, as Sarah said, like, it's very much about control and, like, and how you go through those sort of potential trauma issues with control. And, like, the Dungeons and Dragons kind of model, you are in a controlled environment. There is no, like, there's risk to your character that you're playing, but there's no, like, physical risk to you necessarily. There's potential, like, trigger risks and trauma risks, but that's to your person. I guess, like, with the, like, playing another race and, like, how that would work, or role playing with someone who has PTSD, like, how the rest of the group's characters then treat that person. There's, like, so many layers to that they're not actually getting any sort of real experience, because it is, you know, it's a simulation.
Yep.
So I want to come in on that one, because, I mean, part of my story, part of my life history is a struggle with what society told me my gender has to be, should be, must be, and, you know, and the systemic punishment that you experience when you express a gender that is different. So, you know, I was assigned male at birth. I knew by the time I was about 5.5 that I was a woman, and because of the trauma, because of the experience that I had as someone who was very different, wasn't able to come to terms with it until my late 30s. I used to love playing D&D because I used to be able to play a woman, but I didn't know what that meant, because my understanding of the experience of a woman is not something I really, of being perceived and treated as a woman was not something I experienced until I transitioned. And then I had a really fucking steep learning curve on, oh my God, you're so fucking sexist, everybody. What the fuck is wrong with you? You're broken. This whole masculinity is just fucking toxic. Playing D&D was an opportunity to kind of, like, put on, I suppose, a mask of sorts of woman-shaped character, and you could find, like, a picture, you know, on the internet, and put that on front of your character sheet and kind of, like, imagine it. But it's not. I don't think that there is much empathy involved in playing another gender, because you're not going to experience all the microaggressions. You're not going to experience the profound differences in the way men and women are treated. And I think it's similar with people of different races and ethnicities as well. And I say that as somebody who was raised in a white society as an Asian person, perceived to be a little Asian boy. I got distracted by words. And there's kind of, like, and I think this taps into the way in which kind of, like, the way in which English literature is sold as a way to gain empathy through reading about other people who are different. And I think that there is whilst there is a lot of really good stuff from that, it is also really oversold. and it's almost always really oversold by white people who want to draw back to kind of like colonial history and the writings of these people from the 1700s and the 1800s and whatever, these profound white authors writing about their experiences going to the black country, a fucking continent, not a country. What is wrong with you? So it's a problem. And I think if a group is not willing to have an adult, responsible and respectful conversation in advance about these kind of issues of complexity and difference and othering, then you probably just shouldn't even start trying to. At the same time, there isn't a lot of white culture difference, because white culture is built on a very particular dynamic, a historical narrative, mostly of colonialism. You were the dominators, white people. You weren't generally the rebellion. You know, it's like when you watch Star Wars, no, you're the Empire. Most of you weren't the rebellion, you weren't the Jedi. And this is something that there's like this, I don't know, there is a phrase for it, but it's like this profound misunderstanding of your own cultural heritage and history, and the way in which capitalism and empire all combine to effectively homogenize, to flatten out all those differences, not just within white society, but also to enforce that homogenization as much as possible on brown and black bodies, and indigenous bodies as well, obviously. So there's a lot of profound complexity and difficulty in engaging with this. At the same time, it can be good and it can be enlightening, but it's not going to be enlightening just because you go, I want to play kind of like, you know, a black tribal barbarian. It's like, no, that's not enlightening. That's othering and fetishizing.
Yeah, well, the reason I kind of brought this up is like I've been listening to a bunch of D&D podcasts over the last few years, and you see or you hear cis white guys suddenly playing black trans women, and it's like what are you getting out of this? Like, why are you doing this? Yeah, and it's this like idea of like trauma porn or cultural tourism, where they get to inhabit a tribal person for a day.
Yeah, and I mean, if we're talking like D&D, gender and race in terms of like color don't impact your game mechanics at all. So your species does, like your race as in like, are you an elf, a half elf, or whatever, impacts your gameplay, but gender and skin color do not. And so the only way for those things to be impacted are if the other players and or the DM react to whatever it is that you set yourself up as. So if you're, you know, if I were to, I have, one of my games has a male character, the other two are female. One's an Aarakocra, which is pretty cool. I get to fly, it's nice. I have no lived experience being a bird person, and I'm okay with that, but apparently they have no sense of personal property, and so I steal shit all the time, and it's awesome. Which is weird being a cleric because you're supposed to be lawful. But anyway, like we've had one of my games, one of the guys in the game plays a female character, which we all forget all the time because he doesn't do a voice or anything like that. He doesn't like put on, he's not like a caricature of a woman or anything. He just plays this character who happens to be a female character in the game. And we only really remember sometimes when like, if it's like we're in dialogue with like a woman who may be more comfortable speaking with other women, will sometimes be like, well, how many, who in the group can talk to her? Oh yeah, no, there's 3 women in the group. Let's have all 3 women go and talk to her. So it's unrealistic in that, like, great, it's inclusive and awesome because you can be representative of yourself without taking a penalty, right? Because that would really, really suck if you're like, I want to be a Black human female in D&D, and that comes with penalties that match real life. no one's going to want to play their real life selves at that point. But it does also, so it's on the one hand, it is inclusive, but it's using the actual species race as a stand-in, I think, for that. And none of them come with like systemic issues the way we have in real life. So in the end, it's really like up to the DM and the players to have that be part of the gameplay and represent those issues.
Sorry, I've been writing a lot of stuff in the chat in case the people are looking at it and wondering why we just suddenly grin. It's like, I just said property is theft. You know, obviously, because property is theft. Good old Marx. Who was a white guy.
So we probably do need to start finishing the stream up fairly soon, even though I think this group of people could probably talk until, you know, it becomes a sensible hour for Sarah in Minnesota. Probably the question I did want to ask before we start to finish things up. Sorry, I'm just trying to look through my notes again. So Cook That Game is obviously, you know, we're not game designers. We don't have close relationships with game designers, but we do fit into that critic space when it comes to games. So what role do you see for people who are, what role do you see for the critical community in creating a shift in games to be more inclusive, to better reflect the lived experiences of people outside that default?
If you want to have inclusive games and if you want to include more people, you have to have the difficult conversations and you have to change stuff. And the thing is, we all want a game because we enjoy it. We love it. It's a part of our lives. And we want to be able to watch Cook the Game and kind of like encounter all these games and not have to struggle. And that's not going to happen if you don't have these conversations, if you don't have these critical approaches to it, if you don't have these people saying, look, this is a problem. Because if you just try and pretend that it doesn't exist, you're part of the problem. If you just dismiss it, then you're the barrier in the way to more people getting involved.
Yep.
You're part of the empire, not the resistance.
I think one of the like amazing things that critics in various sort of industries can do is actually like look at what they're talking about through various lenses and like code switch, so to speak, like, and go, okay, I'm going to look at this game from this lens, and then, okay, I'm going to take it over and look at it from a race lens and pick it apart in that way as well. Like, it's not, the thing is, like, it's not always going to be interesting content for a, you know, for an audience. Like, you know, you spend 3 hours looking at a simple game if you go through with every lens. But then, like, I think, and also within that, championing those games as a critic that do the right thing and do explore these things that we want to see more.
Yeah. Also, just can you stop making empire games? Stop trying to build empires and take over other people. It's really gross. And yeah, I mean, it might be fun when you're a teenager, but it's still gross. Just don't.
Can we keep Ticket to Ride?
Capitalist.
Oh, you know what?
I just want to build a train.
I'm so angry with Ticket to Ride because it's so hard for me to see. I'm colorblind. I'm red-green colorblind. And I'm like, why are you picking those colors? And even like the little symbols are pale colors of them. And I'm like going, what the fuck is this? Which one is it? I'm looking at them, trying to pick up my cards and go, I'm just constantly confused. And I love the game. I love the game. And I'm constantly confused about which one I'm trying to get. Even the black cards aren't actually black. What's going on? It's like, Ticket to Ride, please get somebody who's colorblind on your planning for your next edition of it. That would be lovely.
I played a game recently that just blew me away because we were looking at this really complex board, and I can't name check it. Of course I can't name check it, damn it. But we're looking at a really complex board, and everything was kind of difficult to see, and there was a lot of like all of these different colors, and we had all the people looking at these colors going, oh, what is this? What is this? And then it suddenly clicked that by every color, every time, there was a little picture of what it represented, and it had like an iconography that you could recognize. And the second that happened, we like looked at the board with new eyes and went, oh, that's what's going on. We can look at this by color, or we can look at this by symbol, or we can look at this from this angle. And it became this beautiful piece of art, really, because it looked busy when we didn't know what anything was doing. And then we looked closer and just went, oh, this is beautifully coming together. I'm going to check what the name is because it was quite good. And I like, we're on a board gaming channel, so it's good to name check it. But yeah, it's that sort of thing that needs to be built into the design. Someone going, oh, how can we do this and have it be part of the design, something that makes sense and not obstructive. Look it up.
Yeah, I think in terms of like what reviewers can do, I agree that elevating games, like giving kudos to games that are doing a good job is great. I mean, really, it's a platform where you're using hopefully good communication skills to break things down for people, which again, is somebody whose job is literally to like take your medications and break them down into, side effects and physiological effects and expectations that each patient with their very different health literacy can understand. I appreciate the power that comes from that, because yes, games aren't medicine. Like, it's not life or death, but it's really important. Like, culture is important, and culture influences what people do and do not consider acceptable. And so if gaming designers are having critics, hold them accountable when they do something that they didn't necessarily intend to fuck it up, but they take it to Riot. I can't tell the difference between your red and orange when I just can't. And I'm not colorblind. I just can't tell the difference. It's not different enough. Like, fix that shit. So, having critics say, hey, let's work more on this. And here's an example of people doing a great job. I mean, I liken it to how I'm having to treat masking right now, because in Minneapolis, we just passed the masking rule recently, and not everyone is following it. And my workplaces don't force people to mask before they come in. They just have signs everywhere. So we still tell people, like, please put your mask on, right? Like, or please cover your nose to protect your nose, because that's how the virus gets in, right, guys? Yeah. But also we'll be like, thank you everyone for wearing your mask, or complimenting people on their adorable mask or whatever, to try to positively reinforce that. And that seems to also get a good result. So while telling people who are doing the wrong thing, please do the right thing, also thanking people for doing the correct thing, those two things together, not one or the other, both things together seems to be having the biggest results in improving mask compliance. So ideally, critics holding companies accountable, holding game designers accountable, and also thanking game designers who do a good job of something will help encourage, not just from like a capitalist standpoint, but just from like a overall social support standpoint, encourage more creation of those games that do a good job. And ideally our games run by, or definitely strongly including, marginalized communities from the origination of the game, rather than be as product testers. Also, wear your fucking
paid.
mask.
And paid. We're not free labor. I mean, yes, we are on this video, but that's okay, because I love Sam, and we used to be in a band together. That's different.
Yeah, Sam and I also.
Sam.
So Travis and Sarah, we clearly need to form bands at some point, just to complete this circle.
Absolutely.
I by the way, it's Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is the game that we played. Editor nodding in the corner. He also played it with me. Much nodding. yeah, it was really well designed for all different ways of learning rules as well, because you could check everything as you went with different ways. So yeah, but also yes, back to the important topic. Yes, we should start a band.
Can I jump back and just say one final, I had a final thought.
But yeah, I was about to ask everyone for final thoughts. So thank you for bringing that in.
Cool. I'm sorry. I was the idea of that this conversation doesn't finish here. This is the start of it. And for those people who are playing games, actually taking the time to pick those games apart and think about why you like that side of it, and kind of explore the politics in gaming, and then also amplify that to exploring the politics in your life and what needs to be torn down and what needs to be kept is so fucking important.
Sarah, Rowena, Sarah, any final thoughts you wanted to?
My final thoughts would be, we're gamers and we've always been gamers. We're not late additions. We've always been an integral part of the people who enjoy these games. And the reason why we're talking about this stuff is because we think it could be done better, it could be done more inclusively and with more diversity. And the fundamental problem at the moment is that the majority of the games are produced by a particular subset of humanity. And the reason why we call out these things so much is because they're not made by a wider group of people. We can handle, games not really working for us as long as there's a plurality of different types of games produced from a wider group of humanity. So more diversity does bring about more inclusion and more difference and more opportunities to learn. So let's have, employ Black and brown people, employ women, employ non-binary people, intersex people, people with disabilities, give them the opportunities to start up their own games and write their own games and create them, rather than just thinking from a bald-faced economic perspective of, well, the market is mostly white guys, so we have to sell to the white guy audience. Well, actually, humanity is a lot more than white guys.
I think I would also say it's something that is part of what I'm doing through my masters. I'm wanting to see how deeply interconnected our storytelling and our games is with how we see the world. And I completely acknowledge what you were saying, Sarah, earlier. It's not a sudden magic empathy through story, and that's sort of I don't really hold with that either. But it does give us it gives us a way to shift our understanding outside our current lived world. And I think that's part of the appeal for me for speculative fiction, is you are outside your paradigm because this is a created world, and you start accepting things within the rules of that world. And then you can't help but transfer back to your everyday life and be like, oh, hold on, this happened. That wouldn't have happened in this world. Why is that? Just that little why and that conversation you can have is amazing. And I think that's part of what is important about critically examining our games. It's not just that we want it to be welcoming for everyone. It's that we're actually saying something about how the world should be by not doing that. We're saying it's fine that we are not paying attention to or caring about or dismissing or actively harming these groups of people in our games, because the people who are getting harmed do not matter to us. And that's the biggest problem, I think, at the moment is this sort of, I don't want politics in gaming because it doesn't matter, it's a separate space. I think there's two parts. It's that we want more people to feel welcome, but we also need to think about what we're saying if we don't make these changes, if we don't pay attention to the narratives we're pushing and the mechanics we're using, we're just repeating the default day after day. And that's worked out so well for us. It hasn't. It's terrible. So yeah, just to be clear. And so yeah, I think that's something that when people say, oh well, it's just a game, well no, it's not actually. There's always context, there's always more, and there's such a direct feedback loop between what you enjoy and experience and play with in the world. You're still in that world, you go back to that world, what you think is either reinforced, challenged, questioned, and we want always to be growing and learning.
Yeah, I would say that sometimes a challenge for people to understand this concept that everything is political, it's kind of like the everything is chemicals statement, aside from light, but a lot of people have trouble with that concept, right? They'd rather say, well, these things are separate and we're not going to, well, everything's a chemical, so let's talk about the chemical structure of it. So similarly, like saying everything is political can be harder for people to understand. So, I mean, everything is cultural. We all look at things through a different cultural lens, and so we can't divorce things from culture. Even science, we cannot divorce. I can say this molecule is this molecule, and that's fine, but what does that molecule mean to different people is going to be different things. Even a water molecule is going to mean something different to every single person based on their life experiences, based on how they were educated, based on everything. And so everything is cultural. Media is cultural. Games are media, and culture and politics are inherently intertwined. And so games are still part of the cultural landscape that is politics, because in the end, yes, everything in media, everything that is remotely cultural has political ties for everybody. And so we have to, I think we really just need to acknowledge that interconnectedness of everything makes things really important. Yes, everybody needs clean water. Thank you, Sarah. So hopefully more people at least recognize, like, yeah, games are for fun, and that's great. And there are going to be certain games that aren't for certain people. Like, I don't like certain games, again, because Arkham Horror just makes me irritated. But like, that's great if somebody else loves it. That's awesome. But I hope that more people recognize how games are part of media that influences other people's opinions and takes on things, because in the end, as media shifts, that can make a really big impact on people, especially younger game players. And that's really important because we need to raise a less shitty generation of people. And also, everybody wear a mask, cover your nose and mouth. That's my closing statement.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. This has been a really great discussion, and I feel very privileged to have been part of it. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Rowena. Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Sarah. It means a lot to us at the channel that you're willing to give us an hour and a half of your lives, and in some cases very early in the morning or very late at night, to talk about all of this. And on that note, we might just sign off. Thank you to everyone who has watched this or watches the replay, and good morning, afternoon, evening, night to all of you.
I want to do a cool hand sign. Good night.